All right, so our job is to keep you off your phones and leave you with some of the wisdom. As someone who's been in venture and startups for 20 years, sitting next to me is really the best I've ever seen. And so we hope that today, by taking you through kind of what AppDynamics, in the journey, you can leave with some nugget or maybe a couple that will actually help you on your own journey. All right? So I get to play Oprah today with my partner Jyoti, and why don't we just start with some context setting? Where you're from, and how did you get to starting AppDynamics?
Sure. Why don't you start with yourself? You are from here, Atlanta. I'm sure the community would love to hear about that.
That's not on the script. Yeah. No. Yeah. So I actually grew up in Alpharetta. Is anyone from Alpharetta? Nice. Yay. I left 25 years ago, but get back frequently, and I'm so excited to see the tech ecosystem and the various phases it's going through. So we're back as co-founders of Unusual Ventures, in part because we want to do more investing in the tech community. How's that?
Sounds good.
All right. Your turn.
So I'll give my background. I grew up in India. I moved to Silicon Valley after studying computer science. And growing up in India, I always liked small business because my dad had a small business selling machinery to farmers. So I liked small business. I liked startups, computer science, engineering, all of that. So Silicon Valley was the right place, and that's where I was. I was working in a few startups, and at some point in 2008, I started AppDynamics, and the origin of AppDynamics was really helping people troubleshoot when something goes wrong in software. Like, we all use software, and software becomes everything in our life in many ways. Like, using apps to book flights, and apps to, find an apartment, and apps to find, for everything. And something goes wrong, it's very frustrating. Like, why is it wrong? And the people who are building that software, they find it very hard to troubleshoot or figure out what's going wrong. And that's what AppDynamics was built to solve.
So you wrote this great blog the morning of the acquisition announcement, which was a day before the IPO. It's a little drama, but a lot of fun. And you compared the journey to almost a chapter book or levels of a video game. So for the founders in the audience, maybe you can touch more on that.
Sure. Yes, so when I started AppDynamics, I didn't know anything about building a business or running a business or startups, etc. Right? So I worked in startups, but then everything is like you jump into doing your own startup as a founder, and it becomes like I compare it to almost playing like a new video game. Like you go into it, and you go to level 1, and level 1 you initially scramble, and you figure out like what to do, and then you kind of at some point you learn it, and then you go to level 2, and it's new skills you have to learn, and level 1 seems pretty easy at that point, and then you go to level 3, and level 2 seems very easy, and you have new skills and new challenges you have to do, and you kind of keep going, and new skills you have to learn, and every time you go to the next level, the previous level will look easier, and when you are in certain level, that seems pretty hard to do, and and I always say, like, our job is to just not die at any level. We just need to keep going. That's how I mentally looked at building the company. So what John is referring to is a blog I wrote about what are the different stages that AppDynamics went into. Like we were acquired for $3.7 billion, so that was a big news. But our primary claim to fame was that we got acquired a day before the IPO. So we had a lot of drama, like we were about to go IPO, and actually I wrote that what's our journey towards the IPO, and then we had just a few days before the IPO, when most of our team was in New York to ring the bell on Nasdaq, Cisco came in and tried to buy us 3 days before the IPO, and we said no to the first offer, and they came back with the second offer, and we said no to, and then they came back with the third offer, and which was a pretty interesting, good offer, so we decided to take it. Right? But there's a lot of steps that went through it, to build that out. Right?
So we made this picture here, right? Visual, and it's all the things you ended up doing right. But before we talk about those, I think it was really great to hear those pitches. there were a lot of things that didn't go according to plan in the early years. So maybe share with the audience kind of some of the things you did wrong and how you think about them now.
I would say at every step, I did many things wrong. It's like you go into like the step one is just get started. Like, you have a vision and you want to get started. And initially, I didn't know what to do there. Like, so that was like, should I quit my job? Should I not quit my job? Should I, and then you start with some, things that you don't know what to do, and then you figure it out. Like, I still remember like when I was getting started, I was starting to pitch to investors, and like I was still in my job because I didn't want to quit my job, and I didn't know like would this thing can I even get things off the ground or not? So I was pitching to one investor, and he's like, "Do you really believe in what you're doing?" I said, "Yeah, I think so. I do believe in it." And it's like, "Are you sure? Like, why are you still in a job then?" And I was like, "That's a good question. I don't know the answer." And I slept over it, and next day I quit my job. But like even like but I went through a few things. Like if you have to do something, you have to commit to it. Like and if you're not showing commitment, like why would other people commit to commit to be part of that? So that's like that's there. When I was if you look at the step 2 of getting funded, that's how you get started. Most companies, right? Getting funded, I did so many things wrong. Like I pitched to at least 30 or 40 investors. I counted the rejections. I had 20 rejections before I got my first investment check. And John's firm at that time was the first investor in one of the first investors in AppDynamics. But you do so many things wrong at every step. But I think I would look at like in every step you have to figure out how do you nail it at some point, and then building a sort of an initial product market fit. I did so many things wrong in that, and then you go in hiring your first set of management team. You do mistakes there. So I would say even though in the long term it feels like everything went right, every step things go wrong to begin with, and then you kind of go through it.
So for the entrepreneurs out there, they shouldn't feel discouraged if some days on the same day.
That's the one thing I would say. We were fortunate. Our company did very well, and people think like everything went right if the company went well. It's like that's never the case. So many things behind the scenes are always screwed up. Things are never perfect. That's how the nature of business and that's the nature of startup building is. Right?
I've heard you advise entrepreneurs that nobody ever hits the bullseye right out of the gate, and you've also said that some of the vision that you had for AppDynamics initially might have been 3 to 5 years too early. Can you talk about some of the pragmatic changes you made from your initial vision, and then how you got to the thing that ultimately was sort of 1.0 of the product?
Sure. It's when I started AppDynamics, I had this big vision of that everything is going to run on software, and we will become the company. People will do everything through us, and that's how we'll make sure that there is nothing goes wrong in software. Like if something goes wrong, we can figure out the root cause and we can fix it. So, and that's when I started to talk to customers about it, people would say that's too big and too bold, and you are like. It will take us 5 years to even get close to what you're talking about. We can't move all our software to your platform and run through you so that we can fix things. Can you help me? We are already running our software the way we run it. Can you help me fix the problems here without us having to rewrite it to move to your platform? So I was wrong about I thought we could move things there fast into ours. So that's it was very clear I was wrong. I had a second thesis on it that everything will move into the cloud. So let's build it for software applications running in the cloud. Turned out we were 10 years too early on that thesis. We were right, but very early. This was 2008, and I thought everything will move in the cloud in 2 years. It's now things are, but still not everything has moved into the cloud even after 10 years later. So that was definitely an adjustment. It's kind of the interesting thing is most startups you start with something, but you have to course correct and pivot and kind of go through your AppDynamics was into those early years were 2008 to 10, and it was really bad recession, as you know, and there was no venture funding. So if we didn't survive through that, and we didn't get customers through it, we'd have a problem. So I had like another 7 or 8 competitor startups that started at that time. They didn't course correct, and they couldn't make it. So that in some ways that was a great thing, but that happens to every startup. Like, a lot of the assumptions could be wrong, and in my case, a lot of my assumptions were wrong when I was starting, and we had to go and change it.
And if you hadn't pivoted, what do you think would have happened to the company?
We would have died. We would have, it's ultimately you want revenue, right? In the world of startup, everything comes down to revenue, because revenue is going to get you your next round of funding. So it's like if you go back to those video game level 1 levels, if you don't get to the next round, and at some point you will be measured on revenue, and if you don't adjust, you don't pivot, you don't course correct, and and you don't get revenue, you will run out of money. So startups early stages are high. The mortality rate is pretty high.
Yeah, I mean, I help teach a class at the Stanford Business School, and we often tell the students that being early is the same as being wrong. And the reality is, if you don't survive to make it to that next level, if you're not pragmatic about what the market is actually telling you, as opposed to having happy ears and what you want to hear, a lot of time you end up building the wrong product. And even the best. I mean, is anyone old enough to remember the Newton? So Steve Jobs, right, the greatest of all time, like he was 10 years too early with that handheld device that all of you have in your pocket. So that pragmatism you had, I mean, it really did make all the difference.
Yeah, I would. I think, and for most startups, that is the hardest part, like the product market fit early on, right? It's if you look at the different stages, I look at the first major milestone you have to nail is to get some capital to get the company started. But then once you have the capital, now you have to go and find the product market fit, right? Which is like, what is the product that people will buy that will get your revenue? And you start with a thesis, and that getting that thesis to like a pragmatic point of like, would people really buy this? Are you building the right thing? And what part of that thesis you do and what you adjust? If you don't get it right, you'll have a problem.
So talk a little bit about your thoughts around early selling, particularly spending time with customers, and how you thought about that. And now that you're building your second billion-dollar company in Harness, what you're doing the second time around based on what you learned.
I think sales is a lot of startup founders are product and technology people when they, at least when they start. But I look at selling is one of the most important startup skill, because if you don't learn to sell as a company, you won't survive. And very early on, you probably cannot recruit or afford to hire dedicated salespeople. And dedicated salespeople can't operate when the product is not ready, or you are still figuring out what to do. So as a founder, you have to learn to sell. And that's for me, that was the hardest thing as a founder personally. Like, I never sold things before as much. So it's like I was an engineer, but it's very clear. Like, I can't afford to hire salespeople, and someone has to go and sell and find early customers to do it. And I just have to learn and get better at selling. But for a lot of the startup growth journey, it becomes all about like getting your first million of revenue is about just street fighting. You street fight, you sell, you find your initial customers, and you do whatever it takes to get your first million of revenue. But once you get your first million of revenue, then it starts, at that point, you can start most likely attracting some salespeople to come and work for you, and because you can afford to. And you have something figured out, you have a product that's proven in the market, some customers, all of that. And now you have to think of sales as more of a machinery at that point. That is, it becomes a scalable machinery that it's repeatable, it's systematic. You can hire instead of 3 people, you can hire 6 people and double your revenue and all of that. And that's also an important challenge that startups have to learn. And you have to start bringing the right sales. So in AppDynamics, I was doing it as a first-time CEO, and I didn't have that experience, right? So I thought sales is all about this kind of slick people with shiny hair trying to wine and dine and sell. That's what I thought. That's what selling is about. And I didn't pay attention on you have to build a science and machinery around how does the sales process really work? How many leads you need to get and how do they convert, and there is stages of sales and all of that, right? So now doing it second time, I know I need to build that machine early on, and if I don't build that machine right, it's salespeople is not about whining and dining anymore. It's about very systematic and methodical about the sales, the science of sales, really.
So fundraising, hiring, learning to sell, all things you had to learn for the first time. What advice do you have, whether you're Series A or Series B, for the founders in the audience, how would you give them advice about how to go learn those things quickly? Because we often joke there's never enough hours in the day for you to learn everything you need to. So how did you do that?
I would say surround yourself with people you can learn from. That's the best thing. And I look at the best people to surround yourself is actually, first of all, is executives. People you can hire. Like when I didn't know about sales, so I said, I need to go and hire a very good VP of sales who is very experienced with this, who can teach me what to do, right? So, and even if I had to work really, really hard to attract a good VP of sales to come and join me as the company was small, but that's the I strongly encourage, like, if you don't have expertise in something, which as founders we don't when we start companies in many of the areas, try to hire someone who's really good at it, who's significantly better than you, so you can learn very fast from that person. If you're not ready to hire someone, bring people as advisors who on those particular topics who can help you. That I'm not a big believer in like generic kind of advisors. I like more like, say, topic-based advisors. Like, you want to learn something, can you get advice on some of the best people around it, and can you engage with them and seek them out? The good thing about these kind of startups and technology communities they are open in sharing advice and mentoring. People want to give back. People who learn from experiences. So I saw that. Looks like the community here is very, very strong. So that would help. Like I would say bringing the right kind of advisors and mentors, that helps. Learning from people you can recruit, that helps. We'll talk a bit about what we are doing at Unusual at some point, right? But what at Unusual we are trying to do is like, how can we teach the founders in a more systematic way? Because it's hard to learn. Like, I really didn't have a good way to learn. Like, how do you learn quickly how to recruit people? How do you learn quickly how do you do selling? How do you learn quickly how do you position the company, and do messaging of the company? And it's hard. And so it's that's why we want to make it easier, right?
Just listening to some of the pitches, you've often said you learned something when talking to investors, the importance of explaining that the company would be worth $1 billion or more someday. Telling that story, it sounds like you might have also used that. Your first head of sales was from Splunk. So you got them to join your company, single-digit millions. Talk a little bit about how you learned to tell that story and just the importance of storytelling in general.
It's as founders, like when I started the company, I was an engineer, and initially I would tell everything in like very technical terms and like in terms of product and everything, and it didn't really work. And so when I was raising capital the first round, like I got my 20 rejections, and I always looked at after every rejection, why am I getting rejection on, like why are people not investing in it? And I did realize that what people are not, because I'm not telling the right story. It's not just about like what I'm doing, it's also I have to tell the right story. So with investors, it was clear, like, I need to tell 3 parts of the story. And that was my learning there. Like, one is, if you want to get capital from VCs, you have to show, like, why could this be $1 billion company? And if everything goes right, because most VCs know that not everything goes right in most startups, but if everything does go right, that it could be $1 billion company. That's the first part of the story. It's a big problem and a big potential market, and that excites people, as investors. That's how the venture model works, anyways, right? The second part of the story is like, is showing some validation, external validation. That you have the story of why this is, exciting opportunity, but other people who could be like potential customers or existing customers or experts or analysts, someone validating the story, because people want to see the validation either coming from product traction, market traction, or from something, because that gives you that social proof about your story. And the third is yourself, like why you or your team. Like it's like if something is interesting, there would be many competitors. Like normally, if anything is interesting problem, there will be you won't be the only company trying to go after it. So can you make a compelling case of why you would be the winner, or why you have a high chance of being the winner out of other competitors there. So my storytelling about this always came down to those 3 things. Why this is a big, exciting $1 billion opportunity, validation and proof around it. So it's like, I'm not the only one saying it. And third, like really focusing on why we could win this opportunity and what's unique and special about us, right? So once I learned that from VC, from in the fundraising, I saw like it's really hiring employees is exactly the same thing. Like every time you're hiring an employee, you're still selling. As founder, we are always selling. We are selling to investors, we are selling to employees, we are selling to customers, we are selling all the time. And it's really ultimately the core of that is the same thing, is the same story. That, why you should be, joining this company, why this could be a $1 billion company, and why this, there is a proof, and why, why this team, or why, that's going to win there.
So did you really think it was going to be worth $1 billion, or did you just say that?
I hope so, but obviously, there is some storytelling there, right? So, no, you never know. Like, I was just starting a company. I never knew. I did think like, everyone is building software. There is software everywhere, and things go wrong in software. Like, we go into like, like Delta had a problem with their airline reservation system, and the whole airport was shut down for a day. So how do you avoid those kind of software glitches? And I was like, it will get bigger and bigger and bigger. So there could be a lot of opportunity trying to solve it. So I did believe in it. So it's, but still it's hard to know for many years, like, is it really going to be that or not?
Investors can really sense that belief when you hear an entrepreneur's story versus the mercenary who's just trying to build a company for money, monetary purposes. So I remember you telling the story and the passion you had. It does stand out. There's several Series B kind of staged founders in the audience. One of the things you also learned is the company went from 100 to 500 to 1,000 to 1,500. What are some of the best practices you learn in terms of offsites or
Sure.
staying close to customers that you might share with at a broad level with some of the founders in the audience?
As company grows, one of the most important things becomes is like, how do you maintain that kind of the right culture, and how do you as CEO, how do you even keep in touch with what's going on? Because things are high growth startups grow really fast. So like, like we grew from 100 employees to 300 in 1 year, and 300 to 600 in second year, and 600 to 1,000 in another year. If you have so many new people, company culture and could be completely different. Like, I remember the very first time I ran into in the elevator when I didn't know someone. That's a very scary moment. Like, someone works in the company and you've never seen them, or you don't know who they are. So that's it's and because you start the company and you know everyone and you interviewed everyone, and that happens around like maybe 250, 300 employee mark, around somewhere like that, right? So you have to become very deliberate about the company culture at that point, because the culture can become like completely different than what you built the company around so far, and you have to become very, very deliberate about it, like setting the tone for the culture and kind of putting down what the culture would be, and what's the how the company is managed. For in the initial stages of the company, it's all about survival. You're like build the product, get customers, get the company going, compete in the market, win in the market, establish the category. You're not thinking about culture and this as much. Like, but the culture forms. Culture forms in the way you do things. Like mostly the founders and the leadership team, how they operate becomes sort of your culture, but you don't think about it. But if you want to retain some of those, you have to become very deliberate about it when you're growing from 200 employees to 500 to 1,000, and you're doing that very, very fast, right? So what we started doing at AppDynamics, initially I struggled with it, like, so many new people coming in and we have no idea what's going on, and like, it's like, I sometimes I would go in something and like we did a company all hands and we talked about something, and a week later someone would say, I never heard of this, and so we just talked about it on the all hands. So what I learned is like you have to say whatever you want people to remember, you have to say it 10 times. Like one time doesn't work. So and even if it's like half the people don't pay attention. Half the people who did pay attention, half of them forget what we said. So if something is important, you just have to keep repeating it. So that's like those kind of things you learn as over time. Like you just have to do it.
It's like with my kids.
Yes, it's like with kids. It's like and also you don't want to set too many things that you want people to remember. Like it's the lesser number of things, the better it is. You want everyone to be aligned, but not everyone to be like these are the 20 pages of what you need. You don't want to be too too rigid about things, right? So one thing, that's another thing we learned at AppDynamics, like, just create alignment. And alignment is really about, like, what is our product strategy, what's our financial strategy, what is our go-to-market strategy, who we, how we identify ourselves, like who are we as a company, as in which market, which category, then we had like, what is our culture? And the rule that we had is like, each of these, there were only 6 things. Who are we as a company? What's our product strategy, short-term, long-term? What's our go-to-market strategy, short-term, long-term? What's our financial goals, short-term, long-term? What should our culture be? And all of these things you just can put on no more than 1 slide. Like, so it's very simple. Like, and then we just align ourselves on that, and that's it. Then everyone can operate, around those, as long as we don't change those without, a deliberate discussion.
And would you debate those questions with your exec team?
So we had an exec offsite we'll do every 6 months, where we'll go for a day in an offsite, and our goal was only these 6 things. That in these 6 things, and we'll say, like, let's fight over it, debate over it, like, we won't get out of the room until we agree on these. But once we agree on this, we'll agree on this, like we will execute on these for the next 6 months. And if we have to change something, we'll change. But these are not very detailed things. These are like just very high level, that our go-to-market strategy is that we're going to do 70% of our sales direct and 30% through channels, and we want to do like focus on US versus international, or like high level things you agree on. So like you're not disagreeing on them on the ground every day as your management team, and like that you agreed on a strategy and you execute on it, but you debate on it, you fight over it, but in that room for that one day, but not after that.
All right, so we got 13 minutes left. Hopefully your email is not as attractive as us, but it's your time, right? And one of the sincere goals we had is to make sure that you get some of the wisdom from Jyoti and from Silicon Valley, because we do care very much about the Atlanta tech scene and trying to share some of those nuggets. So one more question for him, and then we'll actually go to you all and see if anybody has any specific questions that they want to ask. Okay? So last question is, as you think about the video game and all of these levels, what would you say was the hardest part?
The very early phase. For me, it's the first 2 years. The first 2 years are the hardest, because you start with an idea, a concept, a PowerPoint or something, and now it's like, okay, how do you get that idea and concept to a real product, to a real business, to like customers, sales? How do you recruit within the first 10 employees? Like, it's like when I started, like, how do you convince someone to join you as an employee number 3, 4, 5? Those are really hard, like the first couple of years, and things and the stakes are very high. Like, if things don't work, your company will shut down. So the first, to me, that's definitely the hardest phase of the entire journey.
And then shamelessly, why did you start a venture fund?
So let's do that plug. So John and I both are co-founders of this venture firm, Unusual Ventures. We started Unusual Ventures, primarily with the goal of helping people in that first 2 years. That the first 2 years of a startup is the hardest part, like which is getting from an idea to your first $1 million of revenue, let's say, or like first 2-3 years, let's say, where you're building the initial team. You have to find your product market fit. You have to convert that idea into a real product in the market. You have to get your early customers, get your first $1 million of revenue, and then you're ready for like real bigger institutional capital kind of things, right? But most venture firms are not really helping in that first 2-3 years. That was our primary thesis. So can we make it much more systematic? Because that's where the hardest part is for most founders. Can we focus and build a firm that's like creates a systematic, organized platform in helping through these? And the challenges that people go through are not that different. Like it's like I look at the first challenge is, how do you build your founding team? How do you recruit people? Second challenge is, how do you figure out what product to really build, finding that product market fit. Third challenge becomes like, how do you launch? How do you find your early customers? Early revenue, early customers is quite hard. How do you tell the story of your company, and how do you launch it? Like in a bigger way. Like when you're ready. Those are similar challenges that everyone has. So can we build something to solve those challenges? Right? Want to talk about that? So a lot of the, what we do at Unusual Ventures is what we call the unusual method, right? Which is, we call it like really the process around that early stage company building. Like early stage company building where like, so what we do at Unusual is teach founders, in our Unusual Academy, different classes around each of these topics in early stage company building. But we also provide a set of services. Like we have people who work for us, who we can provide as service providers to the startups we work with. Like say the head of recruiting from AppDynamics works for us to do the recruiting for the companies we'll work with. Or like head of telesales at MongoDB works for us to provide the early sales. Or like the head of product marketing from Okta works for us to help our companies from a product marketing launch perspective, right? So we build out these services so we can help people with. Really, these are the these are the obstacles, right? So what you would see. Number one, recruit the founding team. Number two, find the product market fit. Number three, tell your story in the market. And most startups early on, the story, who you are, like your messaging, positioning, your story is very hard because it's a very fluid market or fluid problem at that time, right? And like find early customers, and then like you also then hire management, hire execs. And it's hard to do, like, you have to become a leader from a founder who's kind of scrambling to do things to you have to start growing into a leader. And that's when you're ready for a big $15-20 million kind of a venture round. So that's what we look at solving.
Okay, so we got 8.5 minutes. Right on. Okay. Fire away.
Right here.
All right, this may be the most. Thank you. This may be the least important question you'll hear all day. As you're progressing, I heard a lot of gaming references, and in the early stage you mentioned Street Fight. I just wanted to know, Street Fighter 2 Turbo Championship? No? Not a player? Okay, no, real question then. I'm Ken, by the way.
Okay.
Ken.
So, as you were progressing through various levels throughout the system, each level brings a new challenge, and hopefully the challenge gets greater at each one, which allows us to skill build and stay excited about the growth process. Did you find that as you were moving through those levels, you were putting more and more emphasis on defining your scoreboard for each one so you knew when to progress, or did it happen to you?
So let me repeat the question to see if I got it right. So did we spend more and more time in creating a scoreboard around, are we measuring the success properly?
Yeah, so when you enter into the next level, the next stage of development, you get, as the challenge gets greater, it's very clear to understand what the challenge is, I think, and
Yes.
then understand what the steps are that you're going to perform in achieving that. Were you able to sum that up faster as you progressed and identify the scoreboard for yourself?
I think
and team?
that's at every level, the most important thing is to understand what is the goal. And every level, the goal is different. Like, so the level 1, to me, the goal was to get capital. And that is the end goal, like, everything kind of builds up towards it. The next level for me is to recruit a founding team. Like, I had capital, but I couldn't build without the best 7 to 10 engineers. So that is the goal. So everything is like, and I would normally look at like, it's not, there has to be something that's like the success goal. And the next level is like, you find your product market fit, and how do you define it is, to me, the product market fit is I have 5 paying customers. If I find 5 paying customers, that's my initial product market fit. So that is my goal. The next level becomes like get to a revenue milestone here. Then the next level becomes like, how do you get a scalable, repeatable sales process? Then becomes like, your goals change. And I would look at like, the focus should be like, what is the success criteria of like, that you have made this to the next one? And you want to create like, more and more, as you grow, like, you want to have more, the complexity grows. So you need more measurability, more, more metrics, you want to become more metric oriented, so you can operate it much better.
Yeah, I mean, one of the chief jobs you have as founder CEO is chief goal setter.
Yeah.
Right? You're also chief cheerleader and chief crap magnet and chief a lot of things, right? And that's part of the gig. But if you don't set those goals appropriately, your team doesn't know where to go, right? And we teach all the time that startups don't increase in value in a linear function for you mathematicians, or even just, you have to hit certain milestones, and then it's very much a step function. So it's your job as the founding executive team or the executive team to set the goals that represent the milestones you must hit before you run out of money. And if you don't do that, then it's the Yogi Berra, like take a fork in the road, you take it kind of thing. That's not how you're going to run a good company.
And that in itself is skill building that you're learning as its own level, is how to identify the scoreboard faster at each stage and then communicate that out.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yes.
Thanks, Ken.
Okay.
Good question. Anybody else? Yeah.
I have a question. You were very poignant in speaking to the less successful elements at the beginning of the milestones. From the flip side of working with CEO and founders, vis-a-vis salespeople with their slick hair and they wine and dine, okay? Because it's a perception. You come from a different arena when you're a CEO and founder. What made you different, each of you, to recognize I need to listen to someone in this tent or talent that I brought so that I don't make such a large mistake that I cannot put this train back on the track? That you could come over your personality of not knowing that, because oftentimes I find CEOs and founders in startup fail just because of that reason, because they learned the lesson too late because they didn't listen to the professionals they put in the tent.
I think that's a very good question. It's like, as when do you go and seek help, and like when do you realize that you need help and you don't know something, and it's I do think it's much. Founders and CEOs, they should have that humility. Is that is very key. When we, as investors, when we look at founders and CEOs to invest in, we look at humility as an important thing. Like, are they willing to learn? In my company, we had that thing. Like when we were looking to recruit people, we'll look at three things. One was like are they are they skilled and talented in what they smart, skilled, talented. Second, we'll look at are they motivated and to achieve something. And third was were they coachable? Were they open to coaching and learning and improving themselves? And that's we were doing when we were recruiting people in the company. But I would look at a CEO. I had the same kind of I had to set the same goals for myself as well. Like that you have to be able to learn, and things are changing fast, and you are in no situation you are the only smart person doing something. There are so many other people trying to solve the same things, and people who have gone through that. So we should learn from it. And that's extremely important. And I would encourage most founders, entrepreneurs in the audience here. It's totally okay to learn from other people. You don't want to make the mistakes that other people have already made. So you want to your success rate for your startup would be much better if you can learn from it. You will still make mistakes, but you can learn from a lot of other mistakes.
Yeah, I mean, raise your hand if you're going through something difficult in your life right now, at all. Okay, if you're not raising your hand, you're lying. I mean, it's hard, right? Like we learn through suffering, 100%, right? And so you have to have the humility to learn, right? We say humility and empathy. Not humility because you think less of yourself, but because you think of yourself less, right? So people often ask us, how do you disagree? It's like, well, I talk like I'm right, but I listen like I'm wrong. Right? I talk like I'm right, but I listen like... So you have to be willing to listen to people around you. If you surrounded yourself with people you don't respect their opinion, or you don't value it, then you're gonna, right? You've got a bunch of bees around you. So I think we both, look, venture capital will humble you quick, right? I joke, I used to have brown hair, right? You get it right maybe 25% of the time. So you have to have an open mind, and running a company is exactly the same. You've got to have an open mind, and you've got to have the ambition, the humility to go find people you can learn from, and don't take no for an answer. That's what the best entrepreneurs do. Cool. Any other questions? Oh, come on, we have 37 seconds. This is shot clock. Anyone? Yeah, I see a hand. You can shout it out, we'll repeat it. It's helpful. Awesome.
Hi, I'm Cecilia, and hi. So you mentioned that your fund, Unusual Ventures, focuses on the first 2 years. of the founder's process in starting the startup. What do you guys do differently from other VCs? Like I think of Y Combinator, I think of Angel Pads and all of their acceleration programs. Do you guys have thoughts about doing those as well, or what do you guys do differently?
Sure.
Love you, Cecilia. That's a softball to end it.
Yes,
Thanks.
no, and it's the right question to ask. Like, what do we do differently? Like, so many people talk about it. We look at like, how can we really help people succeed in those few years? So, like, say when we look at like, recruiting is a challenge, right? Y Combinator will teach you maybe a little bit about a class on recruiting. We have a team of really, really top-notch, world-class recruiters who become extended part of your company, and they will become the recruiters for you. There's no venture firm at that stage that will do it, and most startups, you can't afford to hire a full-time top-notch recruiter. And even the contract recruiters are working with 20 different startups, and they're not getting the top talent to work for you easily. So we solve it by like bringing the best recruiters who work for we put them on our payroll and we provide them available to you, and we charge a nominal service, so the motivations and alignments are right around it. Same thing with selling. Like when we say we're gonna help you find early customers, we're not just saying like we'll make you like 3 intros to some customers here and there. We have a team of sales people who work for us that will become your extended sales team. And then they will find you your customers, and they are compensated how you would compensate your own salespeople if you had those, which is like commissions and bonuses are set on closing deals that they have. So what we do is like we become this kind of extension of your organization, so you can get through that first 2-3 years of hard parts that that would be hard to do. So which really I don't think there's any other firm that's kind of doing that kind of in-depth engagement and become kind of model. So that's the first part. We call it get ahead platform. Like there's a platform of services that allows you to get ahead in that. There's a second part is what we call Unusual Academy. Unusual Academy is modeled about like many of these obstacles that you learn. That how do we accelerate the learning process around it? Like, and we bring in a much more deeper experiential learning around it, and that you could argue that there is similarities to a Y Combinator that you're trying to do learning, but we keep it like low volume, more experiential, that you learn and in a small community kind of manner.
Fundamental to us, we don't think that venture scales, right? So the Y Combinator model has 150 entrepreneurs. Like, they're teaching the same thing to an entrepreneur who's building a cybersecurity company as someone who's building a bubble bath for dogs company. Like, you can't peanut butter the approach. Everybody's journey is unique, it's unusual, and we think the help that you should provide should be a craft, not. And then the 2 other things are, most of our LPs are nonprofits. So like we wanted to make money for causes that we were inspired by, whether it's institutions like healthcare, hospitals, or endowments and education that mattered to us. And our team is half women or more, no compromises. So there were things we wanted to change about the venture industry that we felt like we were in a fortunate position we could do because we got to start with a blank canvas. And so when we told the story, people kept saying, we've never heard investors talk like that, it's really unusual. And it turned out that the URL was available, so we were like, sweet, we'll go with that. All right, so we are 3 minutes over time. I hope we didn't offend anybody, or I really apologize, but anyway, thank you for.
Thank you.